And let me share the screen. Let's make this bigger. Okay, so what we want to look at then is we want to do another measure of risk for our company. So how much risk are you bringing in? And today then what we're going to look at are two items that bring risk into the company. And the first one are fixed operating costs. So rent and your fixed labor, so on and so forth. Now, you can own the building, but that could be expensive, or you can rent it. So renting is a better alternative, but if your business is going bad and it cannot make the rent payments, those rent payments become dangerous. They represent a risk to your business. Now, the other source of risk that we're going to look at is financial risk. And in financial risk, your company, instead of bringing investors in, it borrows money by loans, bonds payable, so on and so forth. When you have loans and bonds payable, the company has to make interest expense. And it's dangerous if the company cannot cover the interest expense because they don't want to default on the bonds or the loans. So if your company is doing well and it makes more than enough money to cover the interest expense, no problem. But when times are bad, and the company cannot cover the interest payments, the company may default and lose the company to the creditors. So these are called leverage ratios. And the first leverage ratio that we want to look at is called the degree of operating leverage. The DOL is a measure of how a percentage change in sales volume at a given level of sales will affect profits. A measure of how sensitive net operating income is to a percentage change in sales. So you can see there, we're going to go over a lot of formulas. So to calculate your degree of operating leverage, that's going to be your percentage change in earnings before interest and taxes divided by the percentage change in sales. And so you see then that you're going to need two income statements to do this calculation. And we'll see other situations where you don't need two income statements. But basically, how does a percentage change in sales impact a percentage change in earnings before interest and taxes? So here are other ways to go out there and measure the degree of operating leverage. So your degree of operating leverage, and you can see two more formulas here. So the first one, we have sales minus variable cost. That's what's called your contribution margin, divided by the earnings before interest and taxes. Another formula to calculate the degree of operating leverage, you could see on the very right there, is Q is quantity sold, P is price per unit, V is variable cost per unit. And in the denominator, Q, P, and V, and F is total fixed cost. So the assumption is that variable cost the ratio of variable costs to sales and fixed costs stay constant. So let's say you do this calculation and you calculate a degree of operating leverage of 2. Then that means that a 1% increase in sales will result in a 2% increase in EBIT. Now that looks good. That looks good. But it works the other way also. If your sales decrease by 1%, your earnings before interest and taxes decrease by 2%. And we can ratio it up too. So if your sales decrease by 10%, your EBIT will decrease by 20%. That's a big drop. That's a lot of risk there. The greater the degree of operating leverage, the greater this number is, the more risk there is to the company. When sales go up, no problem. But where does the problem come into play? When sales go down. So here's an example on how to calculate the degree of operating leverage. So the number of units sold were 10,000. The price per unit is $50 per unit. The variable cost is $12 per unit. The total fixed cost is equal to 100,000. So using this formula here, we come up with a degree of operating leverage equal to 1.38. Not too risky, not too risky. 2 and above starts getting risky. So you can see here that I've put on here other ways of calculating your degree of operating leverage. So again, this spreadsheet is yours. So you can go out there, save this, and have all the different formulas for your degree of operating leverage. They should give you exact same number regardless of which formula you use. Now the next one that we want to look at is the degree of financial leverage. And your degree of financial leverage by using fixed cost financing, such as loans, such as bonds. A small change in operating income is magnified into a larger change in earnings per share. This, quote, multiplier effect is called the degree of financial leverage. How much risk are you introducing to the company when you borrow money? That's what this comes down to. You don't want to borrow money if you don't have to. And when times are going good, borrowing that money looks like a good business decision. But when times are bad and sales are dropping, borrowing money is a dangerous thing to do for your company. So you could see that we have a couple of formulas for your degree of financial leverage. So that's the percentage change in net income divided by the percentage change in EBIT. Another formula, and these will give you the exact same answers. This is going to be equal to your earnings before interest and taxes divided by the earnings before taxes. So the difference between the numerator and the denominator here is the interest expense. The interest expense that you accept when you borrowed money. So here are the same formulas again, but here I wanted to show you basically this formula here. This formula and this formula are related. So the degree of financial leverage is equal to EBIT divided by EBIT minus the interest expense. And again, these two formulas should give you the exact same answers. The exact same answers. Okay, and boy, this didn't come out too good. Maybe you better not take a look, because I don't know what happened. I had all this lined up, but it didn't work out. How about this? This degree of financial leverage, this formula is good. This formula is good. So this is going to be equal to the quantity sold. S is equal to sales price per unit minus variable cost per unit. All of this minus your total fixed costs. And then the denominator, quantity sold, sales price per unit minus variable cost per unit. Then you subtract out your fixed costs. Then you subtract out your interest expense. Everything here in the numerator is earnings before taxes. Everything here in the denominator is, everything here in the numerator is your earnings before interest and taxes. Everything here in the denominator is the earnings before taxes. And we won't worry about preferred dividends, but you can see right here, EBIT divided by earnings before taxes. Okay, so let's go over this formula that I had written out a long time ago. But let's say then that we have Q, that's the number of units sold. The price per unit is $100 per unit. The variable cost per unit is $70 per unit. Total fixed costs are equal to $200,000. And here I put C, that's the interest cost. C is equal to the interest cost. I should have put I there, but we have C. Okay, so we have here 100 minus 70, that's where this 30 comes from. And now, so we have 100,000 times 30 minus fixed cost of 200,000. All right, and when you work all of this out, this is going to be equal to 100,000, because this is going to be equal to 300,000 minus 200,000, 100,000. And this then will be equal to 100,000 minus 50,000. You have degree of financial leverage equal to 2. So again, the bigger this number, the bigger the interest cost, the greater this will be. The greater this will be. The greater your degree of financial leverage. And again, where does degree of financial leverage come from? The degree of financial leverage comes from borrowing costs, loans, bonds. Do you have any questions? Any questions?
No.
Okay. So your degree of combined leverage now, your degree of combined leverage is looking at both your degree of financial leverage and your degree of operating leverage. And you're going to multiply them by each other. So that's going to show a greater level of risk. All right, and so you can see here we have all these formulas. But down here, this is the degree of combined leverage. This is the degree of combined leverage. Right here is the degree of financial leverage, and right here is the degree of combined leverage. So two different formulas here. So here we have the EBIT divided by EBIT minus C. Again, C is the interest cost. And that's going to give us right here our degree of financial leverage, but right here is the degree of combined leverage. When we multiply the degree of operating leverage times the degree of financial leverage. Okay, let me write another formula here. So your degree of combined leverage is equal to your degree of operating leverage times the degree of financial leverage. So you may not have to go through all of this to calculate the degree of combined leverage. If you have the degree of operating leverage and the degree of financial leverage, you just multiply them by each other. And notice that you multiply them, you're not adding them. You multiply them, you're not adding them. Okay, so what does that mean there? So let's say that we went out here and we did an example, and let's say then that we calculated we've already gone out there and we've calculated a degree of operating leverage. I'm just making this number up, equal to 3. The degree of financial leverage let's say that that's 2. That's 2. So you don't add them, you multiply them. So your degree of combined leverage is going to be equal to 3 times 2. Three times 2. So what does that mean? What does that mean then, right? 6. What does 6 mean? If sales go up by 1%, we would expect earnings per share to go up by 6%. If sales go up by 1%, earnings per share should increase by 6%. That's good. That's good. However, it works the other way, and this is the dangerous part. This is where the risk comes into play. Based off this 6 now, if sales go down by 10%, earnings per share are going to go down by 60%. That's a big increase. That's a big decrease. Why do you have such a big decrease? Because you have a lot of fixed operating costs and you borrowed a lot of money. And now when times are bad, it's hard to pay for these. It's hard to pay for these. And that's why introducing fixed costs and borrowing money introduces risk into the business. The risk comes from not being able to pay for your borrowing costs and your fixed operating costs. All right? So not very difficult, not very difficult, but what's the problem here? What makes your leverage ratio calculations, let's say, a little bit difficult? Okay, so if we look here, all right, here's 2 formulas to calculate the degree of operating leverage. Here are 4 more formulas to calculate the degree of operating leverage. So for you as a student, you're going to be asked to calculate your degree of operating leverage both in the homework. The homework has been listed, and on the midterm in this class. You're going to have to determine which formula or equation to use. How do you know which formula or equation to use? Based off what's given to you. If you're given contribution margin and operating income, you don't use this formula. If you're given sales, variable costs, and fixed costs, you don't use this formula. You have to be able to identify which formula you're going to use to solve that problem. And again, here are a couple other equations that you can use. So you need to get familiar with the formulas. And when the test problem hits, you go out there and say, oh, I have these 4 formulas, but I know that I have to use, for example, this one. Okay, so it's easy enough to go out there and understand what the leverage formulas are. But in a test situation or in real life, you have to understand what information is being provided to you. Once you know what information is being provided to you, then you'll know which of these formulas you have to use. So there's a lot of, how many formulas do we have for degree of operating leverage? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different formulas. They're all going to give you the same answer. But because you're going to be given a limited amount of data, you have to understand which of these formulas to use. And same thing with the degree of financial leverage. Here's one formula, here's another formula. Okay. Here's another formula. Here's another formula. This formula is the same. So what was that? About 4 or 5 different formulas? Okay, and then you have, here again is operating leverage, financial leverage, and here's combined leverage. So here's another one. So for our combined leverage, you have 2 formulas, this one and this one. So when you're doing the leverage ratios, there are a lot of formulas that you need to be familiar with. When you come across these problems in your homework and on the test, you have to be able to identify fairly quickly the appropriate formula based off the information provided to you.